Good morning, everyone. This is my April presentation, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all about my topic today. Earlier this week, as well as last week, two different agents I had call me regarding an issue on the RPA, the Residential Purchase Agreement, and strategies they could use for today's market. Now, as we all know, there are two different types of market in real estate that we're dealing with at one time. It's either a buyer's market or a seller's market. Today's world is a seller's market, but I'm just going to cover a couple of quick things with regards to buyer's market and then get off that topic and get into something that's more pertinent to us as far as today's world. With a buyer's market, first of all, you have to be able to identify that, and that's obviously relatively easy to identify. Do we have a lot of inventory? Are there a lot of homes on the market? And if so, what is the selling time? How many days are these homes on market before they begin to sell in a given area? So obviously, with a buyer's market, you can come in with a lower offer with regards to pricing. Sellers are going to be more apt to identify with that and talk to their listing agent and come to an agreement as far as a counter offer is concerned. But you have to be less. You can be less concerned if you have the buyer going into a home that's offered during a buyer's market. Terms is another advantage you have in a buyer's market with regards to your buyer. You can offer better terms, longer escrows. You can ask for more things. You can identify maybe some personal items. You don't want to put personal items on the RPA, but you can identify personal items, discuss it with the selling agent, and then come to an agreement outside of the RPA with the seller, and then do a bill of sale and put that into escrow, and then keep the bill of sale out of escrow, obviously, and then that's an agreement between the buyer and seller on the side. That's acceptable if it's dealing with personal items. When it comes to inspections, the request for repairs, the buyer has a little more latitude there to ask for more things. They can ask for the seller to do more maintenance before the escrow closes to make sure everything is to the liking of the buyer. Again, it's negotiable, but in a buyer's market, negotiability goes in favor of the buyer. So, those are items that you can go with a buyer's market that benefit the buyer, makes it a little more difficult for the seller. But again, in a buyer's market, it's difficult for the seller anyway. Also, one thing I did not mention is, going in, you can feel freer to go in with a buyer in a buyer's market when a buyer has a home to sell. So in terms of making your offer contingent on the buyer's home to sell, again, that offers the opportunity, more of an opportunity for that type of an offer to be accepted. Moving over to the seller's market, which is what we're in today. How do you get your buyer's offer accepted, placed in an area that your buyer really wants? They really love the home, and they really want to make sure their offer goes to the top and hopefully gets accepted. And one obvious way to do that is you never offer below the asking price. You offer at asking price, and depending on what the listing agent tells you about the number of offers coming in on that property or already received on that property, you may want to talk to your buyer about going over the asking price or over the listing price. Obviously, the danger there is your appraisal, whether or not that will come in where you're putting your offering price. If it does not, again, depending on the terms of your offer, you're either back at the table renegotiating with regards to the appraisal value, or if you waived all your contingencies up front in your RPA, then the buyer has to come in with the added amount of money needed to get loan approval and financing. So you have to be careful with that one, but that is when you start waiving contingencies, that makes it a little tough on the buyer, and you need to make sure your buyer understands that. Shorter escrow timeframes is another tactic you can use to get your offer accepted. If everybody else is coming in at above 30, 45 days, you come in at 30 days or sooner, again, that weighs well to your offer, and most sellers are in a position where they want to move out. They want to get their home sold. They don't want to continue dealing with showings and other type of distractions, inspections, things like that. So the shorter the escrow, the better the offer may appear to the seller. Do not make it a contingent sale on the sale of the buyer's property. Again, in a seller's market, the seller has the advantage when it comes to negotiating. So they may or may not be willing to allow a buyer to have a home that they need to sell before they can close escrow on the home they're making the offer on. So again, these are things that your buyer needs to consider, and you need to make them aware of going in to making an offer. Shorter contingency time periods. Instead of having a 17-day period with an inspector, maybe cut it back to 10. If your buyer says, I want to waive that altogether, I don't care, there are dangers in all of this for your buyer. One, you don't know what the condition of the home is. You might look around the inside and say, oh yeah, this home's in really great shape. But we're not licensed contractors, so we are not in a position to give an educated guess as to the condition of the home. A lot of things go on behind the wall that we can't see, and we're not qualified to make a guesstimate or an observation regarding those potential problems. So again, if your client says, your buyer says, I want to waive my contingencies, you really need to communicate with your client, make sure they know the dangers of doing this. I had actually one of my agents recently bought a home and closed on the home. About 2 weeks later, I get a call from them, and she says, my agent said, hey, Tom, we have a problem. I have a cracked slab. It never was discovered during the escrow process because all the contingencies were waived. My agent decided not to do any inspections, so they closed escrow. 2 weeks later, boom, we have a cracked slab, which is repairable, but it's expensive. And so that's, she was upset about that. But, there was nothing at that point we could do given the terms and the conditions of the escrow and the RPA. So keep all of that in mind. Put in a larger deposit, put in a full 3%. Really doesn't, you can put in more than 3%, but it really doesn't pay for the buyer to do that, because if they decide to cancel per the RPA, as it's written now, a larger deposit than 3%, the balance above 3% comes back to the buyer anyway. Again, unless it's negotiated, and then unless the buyer agrees to put in a 5% down payment and make that all non-refundable. Which brings me to my next topic, non-refundable deposits. Releasing deposits to the seller and making them non-refundable. Bad idea. And the reason for that is I'm noticing a number of our buyers are going in, and whether it's this home they end up buying or another home down the road, they need that cash for their down payment. So even a deposit of $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000, you have to make sure you protect that money by making a deposit non-refundable, by worse yet, passing it through escrow to the seller. Makes it virtually impossible for a buyer to get that money back. The reason for it, number one, it would be in the contract. So it's a legal contractual agreement between a buyer and seller, which means your buyer would have to go to court to try to get their money back. Court's going to cost more in most cases than the $2,000, $3,000, or $5,000 they have in there. And so you have to be really very careful on how you handle that. I know some buyers just find a house and they say, God, this is perfect. This is made for me. And they're willing to do anything and everything to get their offer accepted. And then they get into the transaction and they find out that dream home isn't exactly what they wanted or wasn't exactly what they thought. And that creates an issue. And once that issue goes through, if that deposit's non-refundable, if it's already passed through escrow to the seller, guess what? The seller's going to be less negotiable. They're not going to be, they have the money. If that buyer goes away, they get to keep an extra $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000. So again, make sure when you negotiate these type of items, your buyer is fully aware of the ramifications and the downside to every decision they make. Another inspections, already covered inspections, lowering the time frame on that. We as agents are independent contractors. So when we're dealing with our clients on this, we have to be very, very careful as to our communication, our level of communication. Make sure when you're making allowances for any special action you take on an RPA that benefits your buyer and gets in the eyes of the buyer up front, and that those terms get accepted by the seller and become contractual agreements. Make sure you follow up with your buyer to clarify and repeat everything you have told them verbally. You want to document clearly in writing. An email's fine that goes into the file under the transaction log. You want to communicate clearly with that client as to exactly what was covered, exactly what the downside was. In essence, just repeating what you told them verbally, but memorializing it by way of an email. The reason for that is, I've seen it before, where it gets to the end, a client loses their deposit, and all of a sudden it's the agent's fault because the agent, per the buyer, per the client, did not fully communicate what the ramifications were, and now it injured them, and now they want their money back. And their only recourse is to the agent by saying that agent did not do their job, they did not fulfill their fiduciary responsibility to me, therefore they owe me that money. If you put it into writing, if you send it to them before you enter into escrow, that memorializes everything. So at least it doesn't turn into a he said, she said type of scenario. You have written backup. This is what I said. This is what I communicated to my client. And they still, beyond these two items, chose to go forward with the offer we wrote. It helps you. It's important. And you don't want to be caught in a position where you have to pay somebody a few $1,000s to clarify and because you didn't really document yourself the way you should. This is your business. You don't have to walk around being paranoid all the time. You just got to be careful. And you can be careful without being outwardly saying, well, in case you decide to sue me later, I'm going to have, I'm sending you this email. Of course, you're not going to do that. But send it to them so they have it in writing. And then upload it into SkySlope, upload it into the file. Which brings me to my final point. Keep a good phone log, keep a good transaction log, and upload everything into SkySlope so that after the escrow closes, if 6 months or a year or 2 years go by, and trust me, I've seen it, you have backup. We can go to the file, say, what was this all about? Take a look at it, take a look at your transaction log, take a look at your phone logs and say, okay, we're covered, and move on. So those are that's my presentation for today. I hope you all have a great week and a great month, and I look forward to talking to you again. If you have any questions, even if you just want to call and brainstorm with your broker, please call Jeff Green in Northern California, Omar Hellman in the LA Orange County market, Mary Jane Morris in Temecula, Marietta, or myself here in San Diego. Look forward to talking with each of you and catching up with you later this year. Have a great day. Bye.